to mute yourselves in addition to our system-wide muting here. And this is Ira Feldman. I'm going to turn it over to Jess for an introduction, and then I will explain a bit further about our online dialogue pilot. Jess?
Great, thanks Ira, and welcome everyone. I am Jess Guerrier. I'm the Director of Learning and Practice with the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium, and it's my pleasure today to introduce you to our topic and our speakers. First, I'll briefly state that today's webinar is the second of what's already becoming a very engaging series of dialogues, learning, and professional activities that the SCC is convening. So I'll give you an overview of who we are and what we propose to do together today. The Sustainability Curriculum Consortium represents an opportunity to catalyze the next phase of the sustainability movement in higher education. A cohesive, aligned, and integrated approach to sustainability scholarship supported by curriculum and professional development across the disciplines. And the SCC is a member of the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, or ASHE. So let me introduce the people you'll be interacting with in this webinar, myself, Ira Feldman, Tom Bauman, and our presenter, Julia Heiss. I'm a doctoral fellow at Antioch University, New England. I'm pursuing my PhD in environmental studies. Ira Feldman is the SCC's founder and managing director. He's the president of Green Track Strategies, and he holds positions at the University of Pennsylvania and the Climate Adaptation Scholars. Ira's been an active voice in the U.S. and international sustainability professional development initiatives. Tom Bauman is a certified knowledge manager who's been working with Ira and me to offer Collaborase as a tool for this ongoing dialogue and our collaborative work ahead. Tom is the co-founder and director of knowledge management at the GHG Management Institute. Julia Heiss, in case you're not already familiar, is Education for Sustainable Development team leader with the UN Education, Culture, and Science Organization, or UNESCO. Her involvement with the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development and its outcomes, and the current UNESCO Global Action Program on ESD, which was endorsed by the UN General Assembly, makes her especially well qualified to present on this topic, and we are so pleased to have her with us today and working together ahead. And we're glad you're here. We want to acknowledge your leadership in taking this step with us and say thank you. And now I'll hand you over to my colleague, Ira.
Thanks, Jess, for that introduction to the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. I will elaborate a bit more on our pilot online dialogue process. The initial theme we selected for this pilot is asking the question, what do sustainability educators at the college and university level need to know about relevant UN initiatives? And we selected this topic because we thought this would be of widespread, if not universal, interest to sustainability educators who, in our experience, only have a limited understanding of the significance of such international education for sustainable development initiatives like the UN Decade, which ran from 2005 to 2014, and follow-on activities such as the Global Action Program currently being led by UNESCO. So we've structured this online dialogue that will run for 6 weeks. And those who register can participate in any individual component or all of the components of this dialogue, including recommended readings that have been identified by us and by our experts, facilitated interactive dialogue where you can post and maintain conversation with our invited experts. We have 3 webinars scheduled, as just mentioned. We got off to a great start with Kim Smith of Portland Community College last week, Julia today, and upcoming on April 28th, we will have Melissa Goodall, Associate Director of the Yale Office of Sustainability, to round out our webinar offerings, but that does not complete the dialogue. We will then move to the co-creation of a synthesis document. All registered participants are welcome to participate in the creation of the synthesis document on our Collaborase platform, and that will be made available to the sustainability and higher education community at large as our contribution to the process. Our goal here with these dialogues is to identify actionable information and resources that can inform sustainability in higher education. We will keep registration for the process open. There'll be rolling registration throughout the 6-week process, so if you would like to pass along the basic information that you've received about the dialogue, anyone who registers going forward will have access to the webinar recordings, the PowerPoints, and of course the facilitated dialogue and the co-created document. With that, and we'll be happy to handle questions on the mission of Sustainability Curriculum Consortium and the mechanics of the online dialogue at the end, but without further delay, I want to turn things over to Julia Heiss. We're delighted to have the team leader for ESD at UNESCO provide her perspectives and insights to us today. Thanks, Julia.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. Here, Julia speaking from Paris, where this evening. And I want to thank you very much for this invitation. It's an exciting first time that I'm participating on actually making a presentation on a webinar, and the software seems to be working fine. Let me just open my presentation. I thought I would do the following. I'll give you an overview of what is now our new global framework for sustainable development work in general, in education in particular, on the SDGs. I would then talk a little bit about ESD and how we are defining and framing it. With the little video, I wanted to give you an overview on the main results of the UN Decade of ESD, and then logically explain why and how we came up developing the new program, which we are implementing since a year, which is the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development. And if time permits, I would also go into a couple of concrete examples on ESD and climate change education, specifically targeted to teachers now listening to the nature of your consortium. I'm not sure whether that's the right target group, but let me see if we have time and if this is appropriate. So starting with the SDGs, I think you all at least have heard about the new global framework. They have been adopted last year in September. The way they were developed was a very lengthy and very, very consultative process. They came up to be 17, which is double the number of the last Millennium Development Goals. And one of the goals is specifically dedicated to education, which is a goal 4. But I would say that education concerns all the other goals and the other way around. For us, these goals are a good news, if you want, because they really have the same vision as we were promoting education for sustainable development, namely a vision of sustainable development and not merely economic development. They sort of reflect and understand the interconnectedness of the different global issues. That makes them also very ambitious and probably one can say difficult to achieve and to reach, but ambition is important, I think. They commit to a universal approach, including solutions that address all countries and all groups, and that not only focus on the South. Again, that was something that the former goals, the Millennium Development Goals, had had as a problematic element that all development actions were targeted to countries in the south, whereby now that we are talking about sustainable development, the north will also have to change their lifestyles and consumption patterns. They integrate sustainability in all its activities, mindful of economic, environmental and social impact. They address inequality in all areas. They ensure that all actions respect human rights. They address drivers of climate change and its consequences, certainly a global challenge that was recognized or found recognition only during the last couple of years. They should be based on credible data and evidence, and they very much count on global partnerships in order to be achieved. And they are committed to international solidarity. So, as I said, again, it's a spirit and it's a philosophy and approach which Education for Sustainable Development subscribes to, and therefore we feel we are really in a position to support these new goals. I'm just giving as an example the goal that was and is concerned with education. So, in the Millennium Development Goal number 2. Planned to promote access to education of girls and boys at the primary school level, and then SDG 4, already much more complete and complex, is looking not only at access but is also looking at quality education and promotes education throughout the levels, namely lifelong learning. Again, showing that these goals are going much further than the last development agenda. As Ban Ki-moon states, sustainable development is truly possible, and sorry, I can't read that. The sustainable development is only truly possible through comprehensive cross-sector efforts, and that begins with education. UNESCO already, before the Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted, we commissioned a couple of studies to see how education relates to sustainable development, and this little study was defining the role of education for each of the 12 goals. I'm giving just an example of 2 of them, how education can help to promote peaceful and just societies. Showing that the higher enrollment in education, in this case it's secondary education and of boys, has a considerable impact on lowering the risk of conflict and war. The next example is an example that concerns us. The higher level of education populations get, the more they can afford to be concerned for the environment. In this case, it's the statement that you see under this nice little flower: we worry too much about the future of the environment and not enough about jobs and prices today. That was the statement that was given in the questionnaire, and then people replied whether they subscribed to it or not. And the higher, obviously, the education level was, the less it was regarded as valid. Now, coming to education for sustainable development, this is based on a couple of assumptions. One assumption is that political regulation and financial incentives are not enough to achieve sustainable development. What we have to change, or what we have to work at, is the way people think and eventually act. That learning to live together requires everyone's attention and involvement, and that education for sustainable development prepares societies for global changes and can actually eventually support behavior change towards more sustainable behavior. The overall goal of education for sustainable development in our definition is to provide everyone with the opportunity to acquire the skills, the knowledge, the attitudes and the values necessary to shape a sustainable future. It has the following elements, education for sustainable development. The first one would be that we try to introduce sustainable development content into learning. Again, learning means formal, non-formal, and across all the levels. So we want to introduce global challenges or sustainable development issues into learning content, such as climate change, biodiversity, disaster risk reduction. We try to do that, or we propose a certain methodology to do so, being participatory, for example, because what we would like to develop are skills such as critical thinking skills, imagining future scenarios, finding solutions in a collaborative way, etc. Education for sustainable development treats all the three, we could almost say 4 pillars of sustainable development in UNESCO. Besides the economy, the environment, and society, we also very much recognize the power of culture in pursuing sustainable development. So we are looking at all these aspects of life in society. As I said, it encompasses not only formal but also informal and non-formal learning. And as a last point, we could probably say that ESD encompasses all activities that are in line with these principles I just listed and are not necessarily called ESD. We have a new program at UNESCO which is called Global Citizenship Education, which very much coincides with the principles of education for sustainable development, and there are many other names for approaches that we find are very similar to ours. Briefly on the timeline for education for sustainable development, again in the international arena, the first time sustainable development came up as a concept was, of course, at the United Nations Conference in Rio in 1992. And at that conference, there was education already was given a space in the conference report. Education had a whole chapter dedicated. This was reiterated, reinforced 10 years later at the World Summit in Johannesburg, after which the United Nations Decade of ESD has been announced. UNESCO was the lead agency for this, or has been the lead agency for the decade, which lasted until from 2005 to 2014. In the third World Summit, the Rio Conference in 2012, countries repeated that education for sustainable development has to be led at the global level beyond the decade, so they were requesting that there would be some follow-up to the decade. And at the World Conference of Education for Sustainable Development, which took place in Japan in 2014, the new program, the follow-up program to the decade was launched, which is the UNESCO Global Action Program. Now, I thought in order to summarize the main results of the decade, I would simply click hopefully on this picture and you would see a 4 to 5 minute long video with the main results of the summary. So I'll try to do that and cross fingers. Can you hear that? I hope you can hear that.
Through the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, member states have committed to integrate sustainable development into education systems. The following key findings are based on evidence emerging from 10 years' work around the world. 1. Education systems are addressing sustainability issues. Across many countries, a strong trend can now be seen to make education more relevant to the social, environmental, and economic challenges that the world faces today and in the future. 2. Sustainable development agendas and education agendas are converging. Stakeholders for sustainable development are increasingly taking up education, public awareness, and training to advance sustainable development. 3. Political leadership has proven instrumental. Political leadership has helped to create the organizational climate necessary for change. As a result, Important advances have been made to put national ESD strategies or plans in place, contributing to the integration of ESD into national education and sustainable development policies. 4. Multi-stakeholder partnerships are particularly effective. The UN Decade has helped to reinforce the importance of partnerships and collaboration among stakeholders. Interactions among the growing networks of universities investing in ESD in Africa, Latin America and elsewhere have led to international commitments and peer support for ESD. Five, local commitments are growing. The implementation of ESD now includes unique features that relate to the local context. 6. Whole institution approaches practice ESD. Whole institution approaches are increasing and are helping learners to contribute to sustainable development in their schools or institutions, communities and workplaces. 7. ESD facilitates interactive learner-driven pedagogies. Participatory learning processes, critical thinking and problem-based learning are proving particularly conducive to ESD. Educators at all levels are central to this. 8. ESD is being integrated into formal education. There is growing recognition among policymakers that early childhood care and education is the foundation of sustainable development. In primary and secondary education, evidence of increasing policy attention to and integration of ESD is especially strong. The last 10 years have also seen higher education stepping up its efforts towards sustainable development. 9. Non-formal and informal ESD is increasing. In the daily lives of communities, families and individuals, awareness of environment and sustainable development issues is reported to have improved in many countries. 10. Technical and vocational education and training advances sustainable development. International Sustainable Development Policy and Planning and Technical and Vocational Education and Training Policy and Planning are now aligning in the green economy and green skills agenda, leading to new research and capacity building efforts. Despite the successes of the Decade of Education for Sustainable Development, challenges remain in realizing the full potential of ESD. These include the need for further alignment of education and sustainable development sectors, the need to do more work for institutionalizing ESD, and finally, the need for more research, innovation, monitoring, and evaluation. The United Nations Decade has left a deep mark. It has not only raised awareness, but catalyzed innovation across the board, from national education strategies to classroom practices, through to university curricula, and community and business engagement. And this is what we must now build on. While there are challenges ahead, the solid foundation developed during the UN Decade support an exciting range of global to local responses to help sustain momentum on ESD into the future.
I had promised that I'm going to send a reading list through, which I'm going to do tomorrow. Certainly, and I will also attach this report and the shorter version of it, which summarizes quite well the results. As you saw, there are some of the results are related to higher education institutions. In general, one of the trends seen was that in higher education institutions, ESD becomes much more and more recognized and actually implemented in something that we would call the whole institution approach, so in a very holistic way. And the second finding was that university networks are extremely effective as promoters of ESD, but we can talk about that a little later as well. So as you saw, that there are remaining challenges, and the remaining challenges can be summarized by saying that ESD needs to be scaled up. It has to be taken up at the political level, it has to be institutionalized at every level, and all of this has to be accompanied by more research and more innovation. So scaling up is the motto of the follow-up program, the Global Action Program. The program was, as I said, launched in 2014. It was endorsed by the UN General Assembly, and UNESCO was again invited to be the lead agency, the overall goal being to generate and scale up action in all levels and areas of education and learning, and to accelerate progress towards sustainable development. The program has been structured around 5 so-called priority action areas. Number 1 being policy, advancing ESD policy. That means that we want to mainstream education for sustainable development, of course, in education policies, but not only. We want to mainstream it also in sustainable development policies, such as climate change policies. In this last global climate change agreement, for example, one of our efforts with many others was to make sure that the climate change agreement also mentions education as a means to inform about climate change and to counter climate change adaptation and mitigation. Second area is to transform learning and training environment, something that I just mentioned before, referred to as the whole school approach. That means to introduce sustainability principles not only in the syllabus and in the learning content, but also in the management of the institutions and in the management of their facilities and campuses. And it seems that higher education institutions have interesting examples to share in that regard. Third area is building capacity of educators and trainers, both in the formal and non-formal sector. Fourth area is to work with youth, empowering and multiplying ESD actions among youth, something that came out very strongly in the Decade report, also that youth is such important agents for education for sustainable development, are also very attracted to the concept. And the fifth area is to accelerate sustainable solutions at local level, something that for UNESCO is a bit of a challenge because the local level municipalities are not necessarily our natural partners, but we do all of that in partnerships that help us to reach out to these different levels. Coordinating this program globally for UNESCO means that we had to come up with some strategies. One of the strategies was to collect so-called launch commitments already before the World Conference that ended the UN Decade. We have launched a call for commitments from all kind of partners, governments, NGOs, even single universities, to send us in form of an online form their commitment to supporting the Global Action Program. We have received over 500 launch commitments, which also help us to monitor impact of the Global Action Program. Among these launch commitments, we have selected a group of 100 partners. We have 100 key partners who help us implement the GAP and with whom we are coordinating very closely, meeting every year, etc. As a fourth strategy, we have developed a website which holds an online clearinghouse and resource bank. I'm going to send you the link of the website. We launched it recently, but it already has 100 of resources on education for sustainable development. Certainly interesting for you as well. And as a fourth strategy for the global coordination, we announced, or we established together with Japan, a prize to showcase good practices, which is the ESD UNESCO Japan Prize, which selects every year 3 outstanding ESD actors and is a prize in form of funding. We provide them with some funding every year. Now, I wanted to get to a little bit more concrete examples of the kind of work we are doing specifically for teachers. I'm not sure, probably Ian, you can tell me whether I still have time to go into that, or whether you would suggest that we open for discussion, given that we are ready at 6:30 Paris time. Yara, what do you say? Should I continue, or should we open up for discussion?
Please keep going with some of the examples, and then Jess and I have a few questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience that they can begin to submit right now in the chat box. Okay.
Just to give you an example how we support teacher education, we are working specifically on the issue of climate change. We had some resources to support 12 countries over the last year to introduce climate change education in the education system more systematically, and one of the very good examples was the Dominican Republic. We provided capacity building for these groups, policymakers, teachers and education planners. As a result, they included ESD in the curriculum in primary and secondary education. Higher education was not the level we were targeting. We trained within our project 400 teachers, and the country themselves then committed funds to train another 3,000, which they finished last year, and they became a flagship in the entire region, and we are now working with them to sort of upscale, since this is the motto of the Global Action Program, to upscale this experience, also using the materials they have produced through the project to the Central America region. That's an example of how we can interact with countries and support countries to introduce ESD or ESD issues in education systems. This is a program that some of you might even have come across because it has started a couple of years ago already. UNESCO and the Sandwatch Foundation created a network in, I would say, more than 30 countries, but we have 30 countries here worldwide whereby they are connecting schools to use a very hands-on approach to watching their beach environment, collecting scientific information and exchanging the data and exchange, and all of this is captured in a rather sophisticated online platform. So the method is that a school that participates in the project would monitor the beach environment, go out of their beaches, measure the water quality, measure the depth of the beach, but also interact with the local population, ask the hotel owners at the beach how the beach has changed over the last couple of years, or the fishermen, then analyze the result, share the findings with their own community, but also enter the results into this common database, interact globally with the global Sandwatch community, and as a next step they always have to take action on the beach as well, either plant mangroves or clean up the beach. That's a project that worked very well over the last 10 years globally. As a third example, I wanted to introduce a course which is designated to teacher education institutions. It's an online course for 6 days that tries to introduce, again, climate change, but also climate change also, of course, includes topics like disaster risk reduction, biodiversity, to introduce it into education in a cross-disciplinary manner. So taking out climate change education from where it is typically found science classrooms, and introduce topics such as ethics, also the social issues related to climate change education, and introduce methodology that we want to promote as ESD methodology. So that's a course that is online already, translated in 7 languages and used, for example, in the Dominican Republic, but in other countries as well. And that's where I stop. Here's the website to our new resource bank recently launched, and which has really a wealth of material, and we are about to build up. So I would refer you to the resource bank. And as I said, I'm also going to share a list of links with the organizers of the webinar tomorrow latest. And now I would be very happy to discuss and reply to any of the questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Julia, for that extensive presentation, and it does raise a lot of different types of questions, and I'm encouraging the participants on the webinar to submit their questions in the chat box, and we will be monitoring the chat box to convey those questions to you for your response. Let me just repeat first, however, that your presentation slides, the recording of this full webinar, and links to the additional materials that you will be identifying, those will all be posted on our public page on Collaborase. All of you have that link. The first question that I would like to ask you, Julia, has more to do with some of the procedural components of your current program. For example, on the website there is a reference to regional consultations and reports that have been developed from that. Perhaps you can give us a sense of types of information that could be used as resources by teaching faculty who are the participants in this webinar. And also, as we discussed offline, perhaps you can cite some upcoming international level events that teaching faculty might want to keep track of.
Sure. I understood that Hilja is also in the call, which is a great help and a good news from IAU. Is that right? I don't know what it. Yeah, that's good. Hi, Hilja. So you can certainly pop in and also give some information because you're much more savvy on what is going on in higher education. I know of 2 upcoming events. One is a conference on the 22 to 24th September in Tallinn, Estonia, on empowering teachers for tomorrow, organized by the Learning Teacher Network and partners. I'm mentioning these events, but I have to say that I don't know how open they are to anybody. As far as I know, the Tallinn conference still has registration open. The second conference, I think, is more a conference of a larger network of teacher education institutions working on ESD. This network, INEIT, based at or coordinated by the York University in Canada, together with Uppsala University in Sweden and together with Swedest are organizing a teacher education conference in Uppsala in August. I can send you links also together with my reference list tomorrow. And then there's a third event which I would ask Ilya to talk about, which is the IAU Bangkok conference. But again, I'm not sure whether this is an open to everybody event, but maybe you can help us with that.
Yes, the Bangkok conference indeed. Yeah, this is Ilij Van Klan speaking from the International Association of Universities, as Julia just said. The IAU General Conference is a conference that will be hosted by 3 universities in Bangkok, and the theme is Higher Education, a Catalyst for Innovative and Sustainable Societies. And indeed it is open to anyone wishing to participate and to discuss the different topics that we will have there. We have a special focus on the 2030 development agenda and on GAP. and are in discussions right now with UNESCO, as Julia knows, to also see who from UNESCO will be taking part in the event. But it's definitely open to many more people. On the IAU Global Portal on Higher Education and Research for Sustainable Development, there is a list, there is a calendar of events actually that could be interesting, and I could share maybe in the chat box the URL where people could at least go and look at the list if they're interested. We could, for instance, here also introduce the Copernicus Alliance conference that will take place in September, and that is bringing together higher education, academics, administrators, leaders, everybody interested in higher education in sustainable development, but specifically from Europe. And there are quite a few conferences coming up in the coming year that could be of interest to a large audience, indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. What I will do as part of the continuing online dialogue on Collaborase, and again, I point out that these are not 3 separate freestanding webinars. It's part of a 6-week process, and all of you will have access to the online dialogue. So we'll create a space that can be dedicated to notices of upcoming events and providing links for those, and we can all contribute to that. There are quite a few questions that we have coming in here, and with the time that we have left, I'd like to direct a couple of those to Julia. One from Susan Santone is, thanks for all this great information. How do organizations connect with the UN effort? Are there ways to submit programs as case studies? Is that something, Julia, you can address at this point, or to address that in the online dialogue? For all these questions, you have the option to begin to respond here, and then we hope you'll log on and continue the dialogue with us online.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, there are several options in getting in touch with us. One is, I had mentioned, and probably I can go back to that slide. I'm not sure what I can. Do you still see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me find the slide. We have these so-called gap commitments. Launch commitments, we call them. So we're inviting all ESD actors to provide launch commitments, and this is a still open call. For us, it's always interesting to see who thinks that their work is aligned with the Global Action Program and they can make a contribution. So posting a launch commitment, that's something, and the launch commitment will be posted online, visible to everybody. And one of our roles as the coordinators of the program is to monitor progress. So we are using this launch commitments as kind of a baseline on the basis of which we are monitoring progress, and we are always interested for our reports to have examples of good practices. If you're, for example, a higher education institution that has something really interesting to share with regard to campus management and whole school approach, that's certainly something we're interested in and we can also use in our reporting.
Very good. The next question I have is from Rosanna Neal. What are some of UNESCO's strategies for changing the commonly held belief that the future of the environment is an issue that is only relevant to people who are more affluent?
I think the sustainable development goal is a good reference to that. We can't distinguish poverty poverty, health issues, and environment anymore. They are so clearly interlinked. Again, a phenomenon like climate change also shows us that the first ones impacted by the effects of climate change are poor, the poorer parts of population. So I think there are many examples to be given that show that if we don't live in a healthy environment, we don't get out of the spiral of poverty. And environmental stress is, for example, also a reason for conflicts that then again affect the economic well-being of people. So I think all of that is connected, and that's quite obvious. And nowadays, at least globally, not by everybody certainly, but at least by the global community understood.
Thank you, Julia. Just as a follow-up to that question, it's clear that your response emphasized the linkage among and between the different pillars of sustainability. And speaking from a North American perspective, environmental education, styled as environmental studies or environmental sciences, is fairly well established, and I would suggest much more well established than education for sustainable development. Have you encountered that in other developed countries in your experience, and is there any suggestion you might have for making that what I would call the transition to sustainability?
Yes, but we in a way made the deliberate choice to not put those two in opposition, because most of the time they are not. Even if it's called in some countries environmental education and not education for sustainable development, in their discourse, teaching personnel or promoters of environmental education are very well aware of the other pillars of sustainable development and the interlinkages, and don't make don't distinguish that anymore. And again, I'm often coming back with the example of climate change, but I think climate change just shows us so well the interlinkage. Climate change might be an environmental phenomenon at the first sight, but then has such devastating impact on life and societies in all aspects.
Before I continue with questions from the chat box, I want to give the floor back to Jess, who has a couple of questions.
Thanks, Ira. Can you hear me, Julia?
Yes.
So we focused a lot in this conversation and in our professional lives about the integration and delivery of sustainability education, but research and innovation are also strengths of higher education institutions. What do you see as the most important questions or opportunities for researchers that specifically focus on ESD, scaling it up and accelerating progress, as you mentioned, towards sustainable development?
I mean, there's always this big question on how or in how far education can change behavior and change lifestyles as we need to if we want to strive towards sustainable development. So that's a whole area of research we are very keen on, and we screen the literature as it comes, basically looking at what kind of competencies are needed, or what kind of education pedagogy do we need in order to make sure that the next generation behaves more responsible than we do, and also understand this complexity that we have at the moment that hinders sustainable development, and understand what to do. So, I mean, that's a little vague, but that's really the big question where we still don't have an answer to. And we often, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, of great, of really interesting initiatives that have changed on small scales, that have changed communities, or that have helped communities to adapt to environmental changes, or that have changed single teaching institutions. But on a larger scale, this is still a burning question. Also because we realize that education for sustainable development simply needs so much change in education systems, which are by definition and nature difficult to change, if not to say reluctant to change.
Great, thank you. Do you have time for one more?
Sure, I'll try.
Okay.
We'll try.
So you shared with us at least one really great example of climate change education and the way that that helps to advance the critical thinking skills and the skills of imagining future scenarios that ESD promotes. You know, we all have colleagues and students and potential champions in our professional communities who may or may not recognize the opportunities that are available to them to advance this work. So my question is, what would you suggest in the way of reaching out across the sectors, across the disciplines, helping our professional allies to see themselves as such, so we can continue this work of building just, sustainable society from our positions in higher education, doing it together?
I think you're a better place to have an answer to that, because you know what the dynamics are. You know what the opportunities are to create networks, for example, or to work cross-disciplinary, to team up with other teachers from other disciplines and come up with a course that is really innovative and interesting both to students and the learning experience to your teaching staff and colleagues. I'm really giving this answer as an outsider to your community, I would say. Well, but then again, I mean, what we can usually contribute is case studies and examples. And there was somebody before who said whether we're interested in case studies, and we are very much, and we try to collect them as systematically as possible and then share them with other institutions or other countries.
And that is a question that we can pursue in our continuing online dialogue. I've got one more in the chat box, and then I think we can wrap up as we're reaching the top of the hour. The question from Vermilion notes, first of all, that the presentation focused largely on positive trends in academic involvement in teaching and ESD, but unfortunately, the commenter says, I have observed a proliferation of ad hoc educational content and events promoted by educators who are trying things that are ill-advised and otherwise adding to confusion about sustainable development. Has your organization had the chance yet to create a best practice guide for educators to help them know what not to do in their enthusiasm to do something positive about sustainability?
Yeah, but that's a good idea, actually. I mean, what we have is thought about myths around sustainable development. And I'm just thinking of whether we wrote that down, actually. I remember we had a couple of presentations on the different myths. You know, one of them you just mentioned before, that fighting poverty and caring for the environment are a contradiction, or at least difficult to reconcile. That would be one of these myths. But that would probably would be an interesting project to see what does not work, or what are the myths we are faced with when we talk about sustainable development, and how to demystify them. But I can't think of any publication that has done that yet, at least not produced by us. Well,
something for the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium to think about with its members and our ability to co-create material online on Collaborase. And to wrap up, in a similar vein, we have a question from Deborah Johnson, who is asking whether other UN entities are working with UNESCO in this area, and I would add maybe a way of bundling that together. How does UNESCO contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Knowledge Platform, which I'm sure will be included on our list of resources?
Not, I mean, we are definitely coordinating and working together with other UN agencies on all the processes, be it, you know, on their agendas. We are very much involved in the different COPs around biodiversity, the different COPs around sustainable development, always bringing the argument how education can support these processes. We are exchanging resources, we are developing resources together. We are developing now a guide for climate change education together with UNFCCC for the next climate change summit in Marrakesh. So we are, and then, as I said, we are working on this. We have launched our clearinghouse, but we are making references to clearinghouses hosted by other agencies or partners on sustainable development education as well. That's one of our daily efforts, is to not duplicate but make linkages, and especially for the users, make them as user friendly as possible. I'm not sure whether I replied to your question, but there's this coordination, collaboration going on, even if it's not always working the way it should, but that's an absolute aim that we have in our work.
Absolutely. Well, Julia, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences. We look forward to working collaboratively with you going forward. Hilgi, thank you for your input today, and we would like to circle back to you again as well in the future. To everyone who joined as an attendee today, the slides, the recording, and the additional materials will be available on the Collaborase public page. And for those who joined as attendees but have not registered, and there are a handful of you, please go to our Collaborase public page and join the online dialogue process so you can participate in the facilitated dialogue, in the co-creation of the document, and our final webinar in this particular series that will take place on the 28th of April with Melissa Goodall from email. With that, we are going to end the recording for today, and please feel free to contact me directly. My email is ira, I-R-A, at greentrack, GREENTRACK.com. You can reach the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium at curriculumforsustainability@gmail.com. And finally, I will just say the link for the Collaborase public page, collaborase.com, collaborase.com/SCC online dialogue, and that will get you to registration for the online dialogue. Thank you all. Signing off.